Okay, so the next item on the agenda item 7, is the final CHNEP 2025 Comprehensive Management Plan update. We have Dr. Jennifer Shafer of Shafer Consulting to give a presentation. The purpose is to provide an overview of the updated 2025 CCMP, go over EPA comments and next steps. This relates to all priority actions from the CCMP. Okay, Jennifer?
All right. So why is the updating the CC important? I'm just going to set the stage for Dr. Shafer's presentation. The CCMP is our strategic plan for the next 5 years, and it really guides how the CHNEP will allocate its funding and utilize our staff time for the programmatic staff that support the partnership. It is absolutely required in order to enable us to continue to receive those federal funds for resource protection in the CHNEP area, some of which we do distribute directly to CHNEP member municipalities, agencies, and partner organizations. It's intended, the reason we update it is it's intended to capture the latest science and consensus on the direction of the partnership's collective work to further water quality and habitat goals for the region. So every 5 years, we look at it afresh and we say, are there new emerging issues? Are there different things that need to be updated to reflect changing conditions? And we have done that with the help of Shafer Consulting. These updates do not obligate partners to any actions, but instead are used to guide how the NEP can provide programmatic and funding support for research, restoration, and public engagement efforts outlined in the CCMP. So we do have basically a list of lead entities and supporting entities, and it's not an obligation. It's just to recognize the efforts, the fact that we are a partnership and that there are many different entities in the partnership that contribute to accomplishing these collective actions, activities that are outlined in the CCMP. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Shafer.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
I'm Jennifer Shafer, and on behalf of my partner, Dave Shafer, and of course, the awesome staff of the program, thank you for allowing me to receive this, I think, final update on the update. And as Jennifer alluded, we have some good news with regard to EPA consent. You all have a copy of the current CCMP on your desk. I hope to be displayed and used. So just a reminder, this is what we're updating. And I wanted to point out in your board packet, there are a couple of items related to my update that you can follow along. The first is this colored table. Looks like this. And we presented this to you in September, identifying all the comments we received from the partnership, how we addressed those comments. Now we've received comments back from the EPA after their review of our final draft. Those are up top in blue. And essentially there were 4 comments that we addressed. So part of my presentation today will be to tell you what the EPA told us and how we responded. In addition, I want to bring your attention to this table. It's a 2-sided table with some gray shading, some blue text. This is an item that I'm going to go over in the talk, so have this ready for reference. And then finally, not to bury the lead, this is the letter we received from the EPA concurring and accepting the update. So that's kind of the big news today. All right, so as far as where we are in the process, we're here giving you the final update, and from here we go to design, layout, and printing. As I mentioned, this is your current copy. We will be updating this with all the new text, all the new graphics, some new photography that's come in, especially from the from the photo contest and calendar updates that have occurred. So this is what we're aiming for, a very beautiful sort of coffee table book, if you will, and very accessible to the community. All right, that's coming hopefully we're going to lay it out next month, and then it'll be printed in March, and so you'll have that very soon. Now, just a reminder, what's in this plan? As Jennifer mentioned, it is a strategic plan for the partnership, and it is organized into 4 chapters or 4 action plans related to water quality improvement, hydrologic restoration, fish and wildlife habitat protection, and public engagement. And each one of those action plans is further broken down, next slide, into specific actions, topical, and then those actions are broken down into activities. What exactly are we talking about doing? The support information that is provided in each of those sections is fairly well prescribed by EPA. So these CCMPs are pretty standard content across all NEP programs across the country. But sort of how we organize it and how we lay it out is in all individual. So 4 action plans, 15 actions within those action plans, and overall 32 activities, 32 specific recommendations for what the partnership needs to work on. Next slide. In the CCMP itself, we have an appendix in the back of the guide which lays out the whole strategy in this matrix format. We call it the CCMP at a glance. And you can see this is an example for the public engagement action plan. And you can see how all the information on the previous slide is kind of itemized and laid out. For example, public engagement has 4 actions. That's the left-hand column, activities, and then the supplemental information. Where is the activity happening? Who are the responsible parties? What's the time frame for getting this work done? What are the potential annual costs, and where are some of those funds coming from? What is the benefit of doing this activity? And 5-year performance measures so we can track progress. So that's how the plan is laid out. Next slide. I want to now briefly tell you what's new. So it's easy to get kind of lost in the weeds with a 200-page document, so we pulled out some of the high-level concepts of what's new in this update, in this iteration. What we've done in this update is to add some additional strategic framing. So what I mean by that is that there are certain themes that run through all of the action plans. And we wanted to make sure that those were emphasized both in the introductory material, but also action. Nature-based solutions. These are these multi-benefit solutions for resilience, for water quality, for habitat that mimic the function of nature, trying to restore that ecosystem function. Resilient systems. Systems, natural systems, human systems that bounce back and have the integrity and strength to resist impacts. Climate change, also woven throughout, everywhere where there is an important connection to our changing environment. We point that out with recommendations. Bioindicators. This is a new emphasis for many researchers and for many managers, meaning that we are finding that measuring chemical or inorganic sort of endpoints for an ecosystem, for example, water quality, that's not the whole story. We also need to look at how the biological systems are functioning, and sometimes those can give us a good clue. For example, when we're looking at eutrophication, we're not just looking at chlorophyll levels in the water. What about macroalgae? What about the benthic populations? What's happening there? So looking at bioindicators gives us a fuller picture. Environmental justice, this is all also incorporated throughout, making sure that the resources that are allocated in our community benefit everyone. All right, next slide. This is a more specific list of some of the emerging interests and concerns of the partnership. So in this case, we've added a fair amount of additional support information for these topics. PFAS, so-called forever chemicals that you've heard about. What's the implication of that for our water, for our wastewater? Ocean acidification. There's additional research and researchers that are focusing on that locally in Charlotte Harbor, as well as across the state. Macroalgal blooms. These are a recurring problem, just like microalgae blooms, the so-called harmful algal blooms, and are an important focus of many organizations now. Mitigation of HABs, or harmful algal blooms. We've always had an interest in being able to predict and prevent harmful algal blooms by improving water quality, but mitigating is kind of a new concept. Once it's here, what can we do to minimize impact? So there's a section on that. Clam restoration. There's always been oyster restoration, but we added more emphasis on clam restoration. There are a number of organizations that are doing this work in the area, and so we call them out. Coordinated large-scale land conservation. This is really exciting, and there's 2 new programs in particular that we focus on: the Florida Forever program and the Gulf to
Everglades to Gulf
Everglades
Coast
to Gulf.
Conservation Area.
Thank you, Everglades to Gulf Conservation Area. These are voluntary land acquisition programs, and these are coordinated across large-scale landscapes so that the acquisitions, the restorations, can all be towards the common goal. These are being very effective. Post-disaster coordination. This is a new role. We've had a few of those, haven't we? We were talking about Ian, then all of a sudden we got hit by 4 more, depending on how you count. So this is an increasingly important role for the program for coordinating partners post-disaster. And finally, Water Atlas 2.0. This was a significant effort that happened over the last couple of years to sort of reconnoiter, refigure, and rebuild the Water Atlas around more user-friendly and data-friendly pages. All right, next slide. In addition, the partnership recommended that we add 5 new activities. And as you remember, there's the action plan, there's the action, and then the activity within it. So these are all at that level. The first one was added to the water quality action plan in the harmful algal bloom action related to supporting methods for early detection and mitigation of HABs. We added a new activity under the hydrologic restoration action plan, natural flow regimes, to support climate vulnerability assessments and adaptation plan recommendations. Many of these plans are coming out at the county level, and so the partnership has an important role in making sure that they move along, move forward, get implemented, not sit on the shelf. There were 2 activities added to the Fish and Wildlife Action Plan, one related to estuarine habitat and one related to upland critical lands and waterways. The estuarine habitat, we added an activity to monitor mangrove and saltmarsh shorelines and track changes due to sea level rise and shoreline hardening. This activity sort of mirrors the existing activity on seagrass and benthic estuarine habitats. And it was recognized that we also need to pay attention to the wetland, the tidal areas. The second one, related to fish and wildlife, is to implement the Habitat Restoration Needs Plan. The Habitat Restoration Needs Plan was just being finished when we put together the last iteration of the CCMP. And so it made sense to add an activity to say, okay, we've got this plan, let's now implement it as a partnership. This plan calls out all the important acquisition opportunities throughout the area. And finally, in the public engagement action plan under partner collaboration, to coordinate disaster response and recovery. Again, as I said, this is an increasingly important role for the partnership to be sort of a way for partners to coordinate and communicate, share resources post-disaster. All right, now I want to talk to you about the EPA comments and how we address them. I would characterize the EPA comments as more clarification than substantive. So that's good news. We just had to tweak a few things. And I want to step through them fairly quickly. There's 4 of them. And again, they are outlined in this blue section in the comment and response document. The first comment was that they wanted to have more clarity on what changed from the 2019 version to this new 2025 version. So we simply created sort of a track change table. It's in the appendix now, which shows what the actions and activities look like in the 2019 and what they look like now. And so you can see we kept the track change formatting with strike through and addition, and then those that are listed in blue are actually new activities in this update. This is an example from the public engagement chapter, and so it's very clear where the strategy has been updated from 2019 to 2025. All right, next. They also wanted to actually see the graphic form of this strategy at a glance. And so we went ahead and did the graphic design work to update these graphics and put them in the Word document so that they could review. And again, this is something that was in the 2019 version, but they wanted to see the actual graphic update. So we did that. Next. The third item was that they noticed that for some of our activities, we had not designated leads or co-leads. Primarily this was because there were a large number of partners who were contributing. So to satisfy this comment, we just simply went back through for those activities and designated co-leads. So we basically just added these parentheses for partners who were already in the listing to show that they were the co-leads, meaning that they were providing more resources, doing more work. They had this in their own strategic plans. It was sort of more of a priority than the others in the list. And you can see the full scope of those changes in this document, which is the table with the gray shading, where we parenthetically identified the people in the list who were the co-leads. So we did that for 2 activities in the Water Quality Action Plan. Next. For 2 in the Hydrologic Restoration Action Plan that we needed to update with co-leads. Next. There were 3 in the Fish and Wildlife Action Plan that we updated with co-leads. And finally, no, there's more. And finally, Public Engagement Action Plan number 2. So this was not a substantive change, it was merely pointing out which organizations were co-leads. All right, and the last comment from EPA, it was kind of a request. The EPA is, I think, moving towards having these CCMPs across all the NEP programs really sort of framed around climate change and resilience. So they asked us to go back through the strategy and identify those activities that specifically were a response to climate change, above and beyond our normal best management practices, which were specific to climate change. And so we did that, and there were quite a few that really do address impacts from climate change or resilience to climate change. And so they are listed here. For example, in the Water Quality Action Plan, we called out 2. And by call out, I mean this information was just added to the introduction of those chapters. For example, under Water Quality Action Plan, coordinate and adapt water quality sampling data and tools to a changing climate. Kind of goes without saying, but they wanted it called out. Or the second one, consider climate vulnerabilities when planning and retrofitting wastewater infrastructure. Again, kind of makes sense, but they wanted it specifically called out that that was a response to resiliency. Under the Hydrologic Restoration Action Plan, consider changes in climate, sea level, and groundwater levels in developing hydrologic models. Use a resilient systems approach with nature-based solutions when designing restoration projects. And address the vulnerabilities identified in climate vulnerability assessments with projects that increase resiliency for flooding, water quality, and hydrology. So again, you can see how this strategic framing weaves climate change through much of the work that needs to be done, and here we just call out that specifically.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I don't understand exactly what a climate vulnerability is versus a vulnerability from natural disaster.
We don't distinguish that too much because.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. So it's, I mean, we would be doing this anyway, but it sort of couched it as climate vulnerability, which everything's climate vulnerability, isn't it?
These days, much of the environmental change that we're responding to is climate driven, including these episodic disaster events.
Right,
Yes.
but specific, I mean, everything's climate related. So specifically to us, we're worried about sea level rise, we're worried about ground level problems, we're worried about heavy rains.
That's right.
Those are sort of the 3 things that I'm thinking, but when you just say climate's change, temperature, but climate's always changing. So it to me, it's just so broad that it almost doesn't mean anything.
Well, we called out a limited number of the 32 activities throughout the document that were most specific to responding to those changes. First is stuff that we are already doing, like water quality and habitat restoration. But you're absolutely right. Most of what the environmental restoration goals work toward provide multiple benefits: resiliency, economic development, quality of life, health, all that stuff. So this was just a request by EPA for us to specifically track what are some of the activities that most directly address these episodic natural disasters and resiliency to climate change.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does the EPA coordinate or discuss anything with FEMA? And the reason I ask that is that FEMA lowered the base flood elevations in Florida by a couple feet, in some cases, and up to 4 feet in others. And so actually encouraging folks to build lower on barrier islands, Siesta Key in particular, where I happen to be. It seems like we're looking at this thing either through different lenses or pulling in a different direction altogether. And didn't know if the EPA and FEMA talk.
I'm going to bounce that question over to Jennifer.
Well, the Interagency Recovery Coordination Team, there is EPA and FEMA and a bunch of other federal agencies, and they all collaborate and coordinate and work together as a team. And so they're actually going to be joining us on this upcoming item where we'll have representatives of all those agencies online to be listening to your comments of your recovery needs. But there is coordination through this IRC process, this Interagency Recovery Coordination process, where they form a team with representatives of those various agencies.
I hear you, but I guess I'm aghast. I'm an architect in my other life. And to have FEMA lower the base flood elevations on barrier islands, it seems to me just counterintuitive. I mean, fortunately, my house on Siesta Key, built in the 70s, finished floor elevation is at 8. I was in a flood elevation of AE 11, and they dropped it to AE9, and Helene missed me by a foot. Milton, fortunately, the eye went over Siesta Key, and so the storm surge went down the beach and not at the beach. Unfortunately for folks south of us, not so fortunate. But I'm just bewildered by the fact that anybody in FEMA would think that lowering base elevations on barrier islands was technically and correct.
I think that's an excellent comment for us to bring up during the listening session, because, you know, that's exactly the type of input we're looking for. I will say that FEMA leads the IRC, so they are the lead agency, who kind of, you know, is in charge of the IRC process. The other agencies play different roles, and we're going to go through that in the presentation. We have a person here from the U.S. Economic Development Agency who's going to be the actual presenter, but FEMA will be online. So I think that kind of input is exactly what we're hoping for.
Yeah, I'm extremely surprised to hear these elevations were lower. We in Coral have seen nothing but increases in elevations, which is, you know, probably
Which makes sense.
the right direction.
But I did bring to Congressman Stubbe and his staff, and I'm going to continue to talk to him and try to, you know, these things take years. There's years of whatever in between FEMA firm map updates. But I'd like to see if we can't get ourselves more back on track. In Sarasota County, I'm trying to, I'm in the process of working with the other county commissioners to have a voluntary increase in your base flood elevation, for the finished floor elevation, I should say, maybe 2 to 4 feet, that individuals can, and I brought that up to counter the 2-foot lowering, because we're going to be encouraging and allowing people to build lower, and it's making me a little crazy. So we're, you know, and we're going to be having a workshop here in February in Sarasota County. So I'm hoping to get that as an ordinance, and certainly to at least give the people the option. It's not just along the coast. We have floodplains all over Sarasota County, as we all do in Florida. You know, water goes down when there is a hill. And so trying to make us more resilient by allowing folks to voluntarily build up without losing the maximum height that you're allowed to build. In Sarasota County, it's 35 feet above grade or above your base flood elevation for your area. So anyway, I just felt I needed to bring that up.
No, and I hope you bring it up again.
Yeah.
And because I don't think the FEMA people all are online yet, but I think there might be a few people, but not everybody who needs to hear that comment.
Well, other counties, maybe in cities, I mean, Sarasota and Lombok Key have their own option to build up higher. You know, we got to get better at this, and we seem to our building codes and things are working towards it, but we've got to get our zoning codes, which actually determine building height and where you can build from, to follow suit.
Yeah, I would definitely bring it up because from EPA's perspective, I mean, there are times when things are sent out for interagency review to where agencies get other agencies' input before they implement new policies. But I'm not sure that something like that would be covered under that. But certainly expressing during that session the need for that kind of coordination makes definite sense.
And which event are we talking about discussing? This is the resiliency that's coming up.
Yes, later on this, yes, I don't remember what time it's coming up. Topic. Yes.
This is Tony. I'm going to chime in here. This is Tony Kraus. I'm the Corps of Engineers infrastructure system person. What you guys are discussing here is exactly the type of thing we need to identify and get documented. I'll put a kind of 20 some years working with the NFIP. The IRC, I'm here as a part of the IRC right now. We are not NFIP mapping. So we can't, you know, then that program works through the water management districts in the state. And it's not really something the IRC has on, but What I'm hearing you say is that we have flood risk concerns that aren't reflected in our mapping, and we need to manage flood risks in a different way to be more resilient. That is a recovery need that we could document. The process of getting that corrected, I think somebody noted, it's not a short process, but it starts with getting new data developed. And so, I would say document that need. And if that's as simple as sending me an email, I will include it in the recovery needs document. That'll probably initiate some more conversation to get that fully understood on what that means and what the concern is. Does that involve climate change? Does that not involve climate change? Does it involve sea level rise? Does it not involve sea level rise? Are those two things even different? But just send me an email. I will get that into the recovery needs assessment, and I'll work with you to get the wording on it right. And then we would chase down methods to help you get data that you need and work with the mapping partners to get it involved.
Yeah, and this is Becky Allenbach again. I mean,
On
we
this
have
contact-
sponsored, I don't want to take too much time, but
Is his name on there? On the contact list, at the bottom of your packet, there should be a second page to the end, a contact list that was provided to us by the Interagency Recovery Coordination Team. And I was wondering for the gentleman who just made that comment online, if you are on the contact list that Greg Viday provided to us.
I'm not sure, but I'm going to put my email in the chat so you have it if you want.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. And we're also cataloging all comments today, and we'll make sure Commissioner Smith to gather yours as well into a document
Okay.
that we are then going to transmit to all the IRC meeting members after the meeting.
Thank you.
there is a lot of information. This is Becky Allenbach with EPA again. There is a lot of information that can be shared. Jennifer, I believe it was at your last climate summit. An entity that we had given funds to did modeling of the Southwest Florida area to show what would happen with, a storm event of this magnitude. And it clearly shows the areas that would flood. So, I mean, something like that is definitely, that information is out there. It just needs to get to the right folks.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing before I also see that there are other hands. We are funding the CHNEP, each of the 10 counties, to assist in vulnerability assessments and adaptation action planning. And so we are working with each county. It depends on where they already got state funding, how far along they are in that process, which component we're funding. But we can fund a variety of things. For Polk County, for instance, we're funding additional modeling to look at 200 and 500-year events because the baseline is a 100-year event. So it really is up to you all to tell us what your needs are, and then we are bringing added funding to help make sure that we get that research customized. Because like you said, there are already generalized mapping, but this actually goes even further to do even more detailed mapping and modeling for each county. So hope that you keep that in mind and contact us if you have ideas of how we can help you. And then
Mr. Doherty, I think, is first. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to speak to the fact that Charlotte County experienced the same thing, Commissioner Smith, on Minnesota Key. We saw map changes that brought down the base flood elevation. We got buildings that are up here right now per the old maps, and they're allowed now based on the new maps. It makes no sense. As a civil engineer, I can't justify it. So I mean, I look at it. So we're working the same kind of a problem to try to come up with voluntary things for the people that want to build to raise their finished floors up to make sense, because, and we're looking, quite honestly, I'm looking right now when we have land use changes and they're in the coastal high hazard area, I'm looking at our, from 4 months ago, the surge maps that we saw with Milton, even though, I have to at least ask for the health, safety, and welfare that the design engineers look at those documents, because the mapping that we all have and use for the building permits and so forth don't correlate to what those models showed back in October for Charlotte County. So anyway, it's just one of those things we're working through, but we have the same issue. Just wanted to share that.
And one thing to add on that really quick is just that those models have to be recalibrated based on real world data.
I understand.
So we actually did go out and I know the counties did as well, and deploy to do high water mark surveys of the actual storm surge that we experienced, so that we can then fold that information back for better flood forecasting and surge models going forward. Because, models are only as good as the input, and we have new inputs that can make for better models now.
Everybody's working on it.
Yeah, we are.
How far off do you think the models are, guys? And I'm going to ask this question. I'll put some context to it. All models are wrong. It's just a, surprising fact that there is no right model. And as soon as you think you have it, it's a day late. So it's $1 short and it's off too. But how far it off is important. Life safety really becomes a thing at 4 feet. And so when we start seeing that we think flood maps are off, by 3-4 feet, that's when we really have like, oh my buckets type concerns. If we think that flood maps are off foot, half a foot, those, all maps are wrong, but all models, all predictions of the future are wrong. But how far off do you guys think that these maps that you're working with are? And I guess the other question, there's a lot of talk going on about a lot of models. What models can and can't fit into NFIP mapping? It has its criteria set in the CFR, so it's kind of difficult to get data onto an NFIP map. There's a process, and it should be that way. But how long ago are you guys talking that these
Mr. Kraus,
Mr. Kraus,
Mr. Kraus, are you going to be able to stay with us? Because I'd like to table this topic until we get to the topic on the agenda and move on to let finish her presentation. Mr. Kilrain did have a comment in the room, so I'm going to take his, but then we'll wait. So go ahead.
The only comment I'd like to make is I tried to reason through the climate versus resiliency portion of this. And one of the examples I'd like to put forward is in the Cape, we're having a real issue with our North Aquifer, Mid-Hawthorne Aquifer. And that is a very shallow potable water source. We haven't seen the replenishment of the aquifer that we've had in the past. And the biggest part is population, but a significant part that exists is that there may be a macro flow in that aquifer that's changed because of climate factors over a long-term period. So the macro flow westward is somehow changed. So even though if you factor in all of the things that we've done and looking at the population effects of that, it's still uncertain as to why that's happening. So I think it's definitely a long-term climate issue. It's a little bit of it. And here I am, an engineer again talking. I'm a chemical engineer, by the way, but I have done a lot of geo work with, I was at Occidental Petroleum, did a lot of drilling and that type of thing. So it's a bit puzzling at this point in time. And I know that you have been involved in the past, Chauncey, and we're certainly trying to tackle that one, but there's another issue going on there besides just the population and our ability to get the infrastructure to those people. So thank you.
Thank you. We will get back to this discussion in a little bit. Let's let Ms. Shafer finish, if that's okay with everybody. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And I'm glad that this discussion was generated. That's great. I'm actually basically finished. Just a couple more slides. We can do the next one. Again, these are the other two of the 4 action plans, identifying a couple of the activities that specifically are responses to episodic events in climate change and resiliency. This wildlife and habitat protection plan related to wildlife corridors and living shorelines, looking at the impacts to our coastal wetlands. And in the public engagement action plan, continuing to host public events such as the well-attended Southwest Florida Climate Summit next September, and coordinating partners for extreme weather and other climate-driven episodic events. All right, I think this is the final slide. Yes. So congratulations. Thanks to all of you for sticking with us through this process, providing your very important input, that of your staffs who have contributed with the other management committees. and the CHNEP staff. We are thrilled that the EPA has approved the new CCMP update, thanks to EPA for all of their great input all along the way, and this final letter. As I mentioned, you can look forward to receiving a new copy table book of the new updated CCMP in the next 2 months or so. And so thank you again for allowing us to help lead this process. Next step, implementation. So this is not the least of the hard work that is needed in the future. And I will let Jennifer close out this item with just a quick review of what her vision for implementation looks like. Thank you.
I had a question on the update. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Shafer. I understand the CCMP has been approved, but I'm curious how the scope of the hydrologic restoration action plan has been influenced by the expectation of increased frequency of storm surge, more saltwater intrusion. Can you comment on that?
Sure, and those are definitely factors that we took into account when we provided sort of the context and the need for hydrologic restoration. As I pointed out, we have explicitly stated in these activities and in the accompanying background text why hydrologic restoration, hydrologic modeling in particular, needs to incorporate these climate drivers. And in particular, we highlight some of the hydrologic modeling and restoration projects that are already incorporating these new paradigms that include resilience to climate change. So without getting into specifics, which I can't recall, the new projects, new paradigm, new framing is all in there.
And I would just mention that there are hard copies of the new final updated text. Feel free to take these with you or just look through them while you're here. We encourage you to take them. They're your copies. And we have extras so if you need one. But this is basically now what is going to be designed and to the new coffee table book that you'll be getting next cycle. But for now, take this copy, and it does actually speak to what Dr. Shafer pointed out about how we have tried to capture the complexity of how these things interrelate. I mean, water quality relates to hydrology. One of the water quality parameters is salinity. And so looking at how that affects freshwater water supply sources, how it affects freshwater ecosystems, there is actually quite a bit of information in here that speaks to that relationship. And we welcome your input after you've had a chance to look at the new text. We'll be revising it in 5 years. So before you know it, we'll be doing this again. But in the interim, thank you to Dr. Shafer for her tireless work. Her and her husband, David, have just been incredible partners in helping to lead this effort and to gather your input, make sure that every single comment we've gotten from you through this process has been addressed fully in this version.
And I just want to confirm that there are no other questions for Dr. Shafer.
I got one on the update.
Okay.
I think I brought this up last time. It has to do with the event response and recovery efforts. And I guess more clarification what you mean in terms of event response, because if last time I mentioned if it's a declared state of emergency where emergency operations centers are activated and such, I would strongly encourage you to work through that center before deploying people in the field. DEP has a presence there, local governments, all the agencies, because a lot of times you'll find these boat ramps are being occupied by urban search and rescue. Waterways are not safe. Maybe you ought to be taking your samples from shoreline. So I think NEP taking a lead, and when it comes up as far as a event response, I think that's kind of a little too close to the event, unless you're waiting, unless it's after things have been secured, roads have been cleared, things like that. So I just worry about volunteer or anybody going out there and start testing water quality. Pretty sure it's pretty bad after a hurricane. And it's a matter of how fast do we recover, how long does it take to recover
down the road, but I don't think there's necessarily a sort of sense of urgency to have people out on the water, because we're trying to deploy, barges out there clearing waterways and such, so I want to make sure that that's considered in your implementation of that element.
It is, and I think it goes to one important point that basically when we talk about CHNEP in this document, it is not the program staff, it is the collective of the partnership. So we do, when we say CHNEP, we are inferring that we are including DEP, who is a member of the CHNEP. We are including Lee County, who's a member. So we're doing that in coordination with those entities. And we typically host water quality monitoring coordination calls post-event or work with other entities who are, to make sure that we have all the stakeholders on the call that are, to weigh in on collective decision-making with regards to exactly your point.
Yeah, and I
make
just
sure
think you
that
need
we're
to have
coordinated.
that connection with the, the EOC or whatever, so that
Mhm.
you're connected with them as well, so.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Okay, any questions online for Dr. before we move from this topic? Okay, no action is required of the board, but there's a lot of action required, because now everybody's got to roll up their sleeves and get implementing. So